Welcome to Space Mysteries, your trusted source for breaking headlines, global insights, and sharp analysis from around the world. If you're new here, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss an update. On August 9, 2025, the White House was jolted out of its usual rhythm by a single, fateful phone call that would send shockwaves through the highest levels of government and far beyond. The secure line rang with an urgency that signaled something extraordinary. In that moment, the fate of the nation seemed to hang in the balance. An aide, breathless and pale, burst into the Oval Office, delivering news that would change everything. OPEC Plus nations had just cut off all oil shipments to the United States. The words hung in the air, heavy with consequence. Trump's reaction was instant. First a flash of anger, then a steely, cold determination. This wasn't just a supply issue, it was an economic attack of historic proportions. As oil tankers abruptly changed course on the high seas and global markets began to nosedive, the world's financial system trembled. The news spread like wildfire, igniting panic from Wall Street to Main Street. Without hesitation, Trump called his top advisors and Wall Street leaders into emergency meetings, demanding immediate answers and bold solutions. The move by OPEC Plus was clear retaliation for sweeping U.S. tariffs on major trading partners, a high-stakes game of economic brinkmanship. The world was fighting back with its most powerful weapon, oil. The American economy's lifeblood was suddenly at risk, and the threat was both immediate and existential. Inside the White House, tension mounted as the scale of the crisis became clear, with staffers scrambling to assess the fallout and prepare for the unknown. This was a coordinated, secretive strike designed to inflict maximum pain on the United States. For Trump, who prided himself on projecting American strength, it was a direct and personal challenge to his leadership. The very tariffs he had wielded as a tool of power were now being used against him, turning the tables in a global contest of wills. The consequences were immediate and severe. Gas prices soared overnight, businesses panicked as supply chains ground to a halt, and recession fears swept across the nation. Ordinary Americans felt the impact at the pump and in their daily lives as uncertainty gripped the country. This was no ordinary policy dispute, it was a crisis that could define Trump's presidency and reshape the world order for years to come. The administration scrambled to respond, aware that every move was being watched by allies and adversaries alike. The pressure was immense, and the stakes could not have been higher. As night fell, the president's fury gave way to strategy. He weighed America's next move, knowing that any misstep could have catastrophic consequences. The U.S. now faced an unprecedented test of resilience, leadership, and unity in the face of a global energy war. The world waited, holding its breath, to see how Trump would respond to being backed into a corner. The energy war had begun, and its outcome would reverberate across continents, shaping the future of nations and the fate of millions. OPEC Plus, a powerful coalition of oil-producing nations led by Saudi Arabia and Russia, holds sway over a significant portion of the world's oil supply. Their influence stretches far beyond their own borders, shaping the energy landscape for billions of people. Their core mission is simple in theory but complex in practice. Manage global oil prices by carefully adjusting how much oil they pump into the market. Every decision they make sends ripples through the world economy. Before the crisis erupted, OPEC Plus was cautiously increasing output, testing whether the global economy could handle more oil without prices crashing. They walked a fine line, trying to meet rising demand while avoiding oversupply. But this strategy was always fraught with risk. It depended on steady, predictable demand, and a world free from sudden shocks, something that rarely lasts for long in the volatile oil business. OPEC Plus wasn't just balancing markets, they were also flexing their muscles, especially as U.S. shale oil production surged and threatened their dominance. The competition was fierce, and every move was calculated. Their decisions could send shockwaves through financial markets, affecting everything from stock prices to the cost of living for ordinary people. Then came a sudden, dramatic shift. The U.S. imposed a cutoff, turning what had been a delicate balancing act into a high-stakes game of political leverage. It was no longer just about supply and demand. By weaponizing oil, OPEC Plus took a bold gamble, betting that the economic pain would hit America harder than themselves. The stakes had never been higher. This move transformed OPEC Plus from mere market managers into true geopolitical power players, capable of influencing the fate of nations. The world was suddenly plunged into a new era of uncertainty. Energy security became a top concern for governments and citizens alike. Every nation, business, and consumer now watched OPEC Plus with bated breath, waiting to see what their next move would be. The sense of anxiety was palpable. The stakes were nothing less than global economic stability. A single decision could tip the balance, sending markets into chaos or restoring a fragile calm. The group's bold gamble had set off a high-stakes showdown, pitting economic interests against political ambitions. The outcome was impossible to predict. Would the world adapt, or would the crisis spiral out of control? The oil market's delicate balance was shattered, leaving chaos in its wake. Supply chains faltered, and prices swung wildly. OPEC Plus had rewritten the rules of the game, leaving everyone scrambling to understand the new reality. The world was left to deal with the fallout. The tightrope had snapped, and no one could say what would come next. Even before the cutoff, oil markets were jittery. Analysts warned demand might drop after the summer driving season. Asian imports were already slowing, a red flag for producers. The fear: a supply glut could crash prices, hurting all exporters. OPEC Plus needed to read the market perfectly, but the risk of a misstep was high. The market was fragile, reacting wildly to any rumor or policy change. Now, with the US cut off, panic replaced uncertainty. The question: where would America get its oil, and where would OPEC Plus sell theirs? Old rules of supply and demand no longer applied. Political maneuvering and economic warfare took over. The fear of a full-blown energy crisis was real. Global supply chains were at risk of chaos. The market scrambled for answers. Instability was the new normal. The world braced for the unknown. Every decision carried outsized consequences. The energy crisis was no longer hypothetical. It was unfolding in real time. Oil markets are deeply entangled with global politics. Today, that connection is more volatile than ever. US confrontations with Russia and China fuel constant uncertainty. Sanctions and trade wars disrupt oil flows as much as natural disasters. The US-Russia standoff threatens to remove major supply, spiking prices. Meanwhile, US-China trade tensions slow global growth, reducing oil demand. Every political move ripples through the energy system. Decisions in Washington can upend refineries in India or shipping in China. The OPEC Plus cutoff is the ultimate example. Oil as a weapon in a geopolitical chess match. Alliances, rivalries, and power plays now drive the market. The world's energy supply hangs in the balance. The chessboard is active and every move matters. The crisis is a product of these deep-seated tensions. Stability is a distant memory. The stakes have never been higher. Every crisis has a trigger. Sometimes it's a single decision that sets off a chain reaction no one can control. This one began when President Trump threatened to double tariffs on Indian goods if India didn't stop buying Russian oil. The world watched as the stakes rose overnight. He expected India to back down, but misjudged global fatigue with US pressure tactics. Years of similar ultimatums had already worn thin the patience of many nations. India faced a tough choice: lose access to the lucrative US market, or risk its own energy security by giving up cheap Russian oil. The decision was not just economic, but deeply political. The ultimatum was seen as an attack on India's sovereignty. Across the country, politicians and citizens alike bristled at the idea of being forced to choose sides. Under mounting pressure, India made a dramatic decision. It refused to yield, signaling a new era of assertiveness on the world stage. Trump's threat didn't just target India, it united other nations frustrated with US trade policy. Countries that had once acted alone now saw the value in standing together. The move against India became a rallying point for coordinated pushback. Leaders from Europe, Asia, and beyond began to openly question American dominance. The tariff threat was the spark that ignited a global response. Suddenly, the world was no longer willing to accept business as usual. It set off a domino effect across the oil market. Prices swung wildly, and uncertainty rippled through economies everywhere. Other countries saw the need to stand together. Alliances formed quickly, with new partnerships emerging in response to the crisis. The issue was no longer just about trade, it was about resisting American dominance. For many, it became a fight for autonomy and respect on the global stage. The world's frustration boiled over. The crisis escalated rapidly, with protests erupting and markets in turmoil. The US found itself facing a united front, one it hadn't anticipated, and one that would prove difficult to break. The fire had been lit. What started as a single spark now threatened to engulf the entire global order. India responded to Trump's ultimatum by halting all Russian oil purchases. Protecting US trade ties took priority over discounted energy. The move was swift, shipments canceled, orders frozen. Russia lost a crucial customer overnight. Indian refineries scrambled for new suppliers, driving up prices for non-Russian oil. Russia faced a glut of unsold crude, scrambling for buyers. The global oil trade was thrown into disarray. The world saw the power of US economic pressure. But the precedent was dangerous. Energy security now tied to trade disputes. The system grew more fragile. Russia's next move would shape the crisis. The world watched as millions of barrels sought a new home. The fallout was just beginning. The crisis deepened. With India gone, Russia turned to China, offering steep discounts on its stranded oil. China, already Russia's top customer, was tempted by cheap crude. The discounts aimed to make Russian oil irresistible to Chinese refineries, but there were hurdles. China preferred a different grade, and its refineries weren't optimized for Urals crude. Even with discounts, China hesitated to absorb all the excess. Some independent refineries took a few cargoes, but the bulk remained unsold. The price of Russian oil plummeted, reflecting Russia's desperation. China's response was cautious, not a full embrace. The market watched to see if China would bail out Russia. The fate of millions of barrels hung in the balance. Russia's survival depended on China's decision. The crisis exposed the limits of their partnership. The oil glut persisted. The uncertainty grew. China now held enormous leverage, but moved carefully. Buying all of Russia's oil risked provoking U.S. retaliation, tariffs, sanctions, or worse. China's leaders prioritized stability over confrontation. Operational challenges also slowed China's response. Refineries needed time to adapt. Redirecting massive shipments wasn't simple. China bought some oil, but not enough to solve Russia's problem. A dangerous surplus lingered, keeping prices low. China's caution showed its alliance with Russia had limits. Self-interest guided every move. The market remained fragile, with excess oil and nervous traders. Old trade patterns were breaking down. The global energy landscape was shifting. China's hesitation left the crisis unresolved. The world waited for the next shock. The past weeks have revealed the fragility of the global oil market. A single U.S. threat triggered a chain reaction, reshaping energy flows overnight. India's retreat, Russia's pivot, and China's caution exposed deep vulnerabilities. Geopolitics now drive the market, not just supply and demand. Russia faces economic pain. Other producers see new opportunities. China holds power but fears U.S. backlash. The energy game is ruthless. One nation's crisis is another's chance. The world faces profound uncertainty. OPEC Plus's bold move, shifting demand, and political pressure make the future unpredictable. The old stability is gone. Every player is bracing for the next shock. The risk of violent market swings is higher than ever. The ingredients for a global energy crisis are in place. The world stands on the brink.